Is there actually such a thing as objective morality? Are right and wrong real things that all people at all times are obliged to obey, or are they just matters of opinion? Was Adolf Hitler evil? If so, why? And where did the standards he's judged by come from? The moral argument for the existence of God tries to show that moral values must be objective and universal to make any sense. And if moral values are objective, the source must be a transcendent personal being who is concerned with the actions of human beings. This is one of the most powerful arguments for God's existence because all of us have a sense of right and wrong, good and evil, and the way things ought to be. The question is how to account for why that is. There are two basic ways to view morality, as relative or as objective. The most widely held view in our culture is called relativism. Relativism holds that societies or individuals decide what is right and wrong, and that those values vary from culture to culture or person to person. There are no objective, universal moral truths, just conventions for behavior that are created by people and that are subject to change. There are three different forms of relativism: cultural relativism, conventionalism, and ethical subjectivism. Cultural relativism is based on the observation that different cultures seem to have different values. And since they all have different value systems, there must be no right system, no objective morality. For example, some cultures, like Mexico, declare abortion to be abhorrent and have passed laws prohibiting it. Other cultures, like the United States, permit abortion as a legal option open to any pregnant woman for any reason. Still other cultures, like China, have actually required abortions under certain circumstances. Cultural relativism says that because each culture is holding to its own view of morality, and because these views differ, there must be no objective morality. There are several problems with this line of thinking. One is that observing how cultures behave is just that, observation, and nothing more. At best, these observations are simply statements of fact. Morals are not descriptions of the way things are. Morals are prescriptions of the way things ought to be. Just because things are a certain way doesn't mean that they should be that way. When Popeye says, "I am what I am," he's making a statement of fact, not a moral claim. If he said, "I ought to be what I am," then he would be making a moral claim. Another problem with cultural relativism is its premise that different answers to a given question means that there is no right answer. Just because Mexico, the United States, and China disagree on the issue of abortion does not mean there is no right or wrong approach to abortion. If two golfers disagreed on how many strokes one of them took on a hole, it doesn't mean there's no incorrect answer. Either both of them are wrong or one of them is right. They cannot both be right. When people disagree about morality, it does not mean there is no objective morality. Finally, let's say someone disagrees with cultural relativism. If the cultural relativist is to remain consistent, they must agree that the fact that there is a disagreement means there is no wrong view of moral theory. But as a cultural relativist, they are claiming there is a correct view of moral theory and that all the other views are incorrect. As a result, they can't live their own philosophy. On the other hand, if the cultural relativist claims that the opposing view is a wrong way to think about the issue, then again they show they are not actually a relativist. Thus, cultural relativism cannot give an account for the basis of morality. The view that each society decides what is right and wrong for itself is called conventionalism. In contrast to cultural relativism, which says there is no right or wrong answer, conventionalism claims that there is a right and wrong, but it varies from society to society. The majority rules, and morality becomes simply what is legal. If conventionalism is true, the results are counterintuitive and very hard to live out. For example, let's say a law was passed that made having blue eyes illegal, and that the penalty for having blue eyes is death. There would not only be nothing immoral about the law, but in fact it would be immoral to have blue eyes. But we don't need to invent absurd hypothetical situations to see what a conventionalist society would look like. Conventionalism was the philosophy of Germany in the 1930s and 40s. Thus, when the Nazis declared Jews to be subhuman and deserving of death, there was no recourse for the Jews. The law, by definition, was moral. The large community of societies who protested were ignored. After all, what grounds did they have to critique German society? As a result, 6 million Jews were systematically killed, and the defense given by Nazis at the Nuremberg trial was conventionalism. It couldn't have been wrong, it was the law, they said. We were only following orders. One of conventionalism's problems is that it leaves no room for society to be reformed. If society defines morality, then a person who protests against the laws of that society is, by definition, immoral and criminal. If a society were to change a law, it would not change from immoral to moral or from unjust to just. The law could only change from one rule to another. It would simply be different, not better or worse. Think about what this means. If conventionalism is true, then people like Gandhi, Jesus, and William Wilberforce would be among the most egregious criminals that ever lived. Their crime? They thought society could be changed for the better. The criminalization of such moral reformers is, of course, wildly counterintuitive and helps show the bankruptcy of the conventionalist view. Ultimately, conventionalism is about power, not morality. Whichever way the wind blows, the will of the majority is what is moral. Like a gang of bullies forcing into submission those who would dare oppose them, conventionalism forces its preferences on everyone by defining itself into power. And like cultural relativism, this fails to account for morality. The most widespread form of relativism is ethical subjectivism. In this view, individuals decide what is right and wrong for themselves and themselves only. Morality is nothing more than personal preference and opinion. What's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me. One of the major problems with ethical subjectivism has to do with language. Conversation about values and moral topics becomes completely incoherent. No longer could anyone say what was right or wrong with any meaning. The best you could say is, I choose not to do that because it's wrong for me, or I don't prefer that. An ethical subjectivist could not meaningfully call the terrorist attack on September 11th evil or wrong, and they couldn't call the rescue workers good or heroic and make any sense. When an ethical subjectivist makes a statement about the morality of an event or action, they're not talking about anything other than their opinion of it, and not about the thing itself. The fatal flaw in this view is that it's clearly self-refuting. Again, consider the statement, what's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me. The statement makes no sense. It says that truth claims can only apply to the person making them. The problem is that if this statement is true, it applies to everyone, which, of course, means the statement is false. A very effective way to expose the bankruptcy of ethical subjectivism is by using examples of obvious moral clarity that apply to all people at all times. Torturing babies for fun is wrong is a well-known example. When confronted with this statement, an ethical subjectivist would then be in the unenviable position of having to argue against it. They may not personally think it's right, but they could not say it is wrong and be consistent. Just imagine what kind of people this system produces. In this system, an ethical subjectivist must walk past a rape in action since they can't condemn it for anyone but themselves. An ethical subjectivist must allow trespassers into their home, thieves to burgle it, and arsonists to burn it, as long as the trespassers, thieves, and arsonists don't believe their acts are wrong. But nobody lives this way. Or do they?